Hello, welcome to the first Red Helix cybersecurity podcast. My name's Tom Exelby. I'm head of cybersecurity, and I'm joined today on the podcast with our technology director, Rob Pocock, who is here to help me in our discussion around CTEM, Continuous Threat Exposure Management. Rob, why are we talking about this today?
It's a technology, it's a process, which actually we've been talking about in the industry for a while. Customers, organizations are actively doing it. Some are doing it without realizing they're doing it. So it's just an update really to say what CTEM is and why we believe it's important and why we think over the next couple of months or years, we're going to see more organizations following this framework. That's for various reasons. We now know that doing security checks once a quarter, once a month, once a year sometimes, doesn't really work. With all the news released at the moment about the UK retail attacks, bit of a wake-up call. We know that the attackers are getting more sophisticated, they're trying harder, and they're doing that faster. So we're seeing the sophistication of the attacks increase rapidly. Gartner, bless them, they've talked about CTEM for a while. You'll see statistics out there saying that by 2026, 70%, I think it is, of enterprises will be doing CTEM. So it's probably good to explain to some of those enterprises what CTEM is, but more importantly, what it isn't. There's quite a few myths out there that you can go out and buy a CTEM tool and you just plug it in and it works. That's not what CTEM's about. It's more of a process, which we will talk about over the next sort of 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, and I think this is quite poignant. Earlier this month, we had the CrowdStrike threat hunting report for 2025, which was released. And as you mentioned, this is off the back of what's been a really turbulent year for cybersecurity professionals with the significant incidents in UK retail, where we've all turned around and gone, so we know they had a good solutions in place in those larger organizations. We don't need to delve into it, but what more can we do? I think this is an area where people using this process, adopting these practices, could really make a difference in their internal security situation. And it's been recognized by the NCSC, who, for those of you who don't know, that's the UK's government-based organization that provides advice to the public sector around cybersecurity. And their assessment framework's actually just been updated, and it actually includes a segment about why continuous management and continuous threat assessment is really important. I think the aim of this is really to have a practical, informed discussion between Rob and myself, trying to avoid the nonsense. We're not going to go into the intricacies of definitions between vulnerabilities and exposures, because certainly in my research for this discussion, I've noticed that's a common talking point. But we're going to talk about what CTEM is, why we think it's important, but also try and give you that practical advice. Rob, to kick things off, CTEM, talk to me about what it is.
It's a framework. It's a process. It's a very detailed process of how you should evaluate your security. In the past, what we've tried to do is say, when we go to board meetings, there's a CISO or a CTO, the question everybody asks is, how secure are we? What they don't ever say at the end of that sentence is, how secure are we really? We can generate, any security department can generate a list of 2,000 vulnerabilities which exist on their network, and you say, this is how unsecure we are. But actually, are those vulnerabilities really dangerous? Is it a machine, not internet connected? It's not really important. Yes, it's got a vulnerability, but am I going to lose my business even if it does get breached? If it's not connected to anything else, it probably can't get breached. So fixing that problem isn't really the best use of an engineer's time or an analyst's time. So the whole of CTEM is just putting some thought behind what it is I'm trying to protect. Is it really vulnerable? What does that vulnerability really mean? Is that vulnerability being actively used by the hackers at the moment? And then looking at that validation, has what I've just said made sense? Can I fix it? If I have fixed it, test it again. And then that gives you a whole work process to go forward continuously, as we keep saying, and just cycle this loop round again to make your security posture and your maturity better.
It's quite interesting. You mentioned there people talking about how secure are we? If lots of professionals really look into the mirror, they probably recognize they're talking about how secure were we when I did the assessment, not how secure are we right now. And that assessment, if it was a pen test or maybe some sort of consultative interaction or even a risk assessment, it could be months out of date. Maybe even years, right? If you're a small to medium-sized business and you get your pen test every 3 years, I think, for your ISO, that could be significantly out of date. We've seen the threats moving so quickly that if these businesses aren't recognizing how important it is, they really could be talking the wrong level of security and not about their current state and the current threat.
I liken it to the MOT test of your car, which we get done every year. Because you pass your MOT test today doesn't mean for the next year you don't have to check your tyres, you don't have to check your oil, you don't have to check your water, you don't have to do routine maintenance. It's a point in time. Now, I'm not saying we should do our MOT test every 2 days, but in the security world, with a continuous process, we can find those changes. It could be a misconfiguration of a router 3 days after your pen test. Suddenly you've got a massive hole in your security. If you're not doing continuous assessment, you're not going to know about that until either you get breached or your next test. It's just that process of just saying, yes, we are secure today, we've done our pen testing, we've done whatever, but it's just maintaining that status, which you have to do continuously.
It's a very conscious process. And I think being from the military, a military background, this always reminds me to something that we used to talk a lot about, which is about the OODA loop. I've written a piece for our newsletter about this, so make sure you check that out if you're interested in hearing more on this. Effectively, it's a military-based process that was invented by an American in the 70s, all about how to outthink adversary fighter jets, right, when you're in a dogfight. So it's all quite interesting. And this chap did loads of research, and the OODA loop's around observe, orientate, decide, and act. You're looking at the situation, you're calculating how it's going to impact you and what you can do to be successful, depending on whatever you're trying to do, right? And then you're putting it into practice. And then you go through the situation, you go through that process continually. The idea being the faster you can do that process, the more ahead you get of your attackers. And I think that's similar here.
It's again, if you read Gartner and what they say about C10, there's 5 phrases: scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, and mobilization. It's basically saying, what is it I'm trying to protect? Unless you know what you're trying to protect, what your crown jewels are, you don't know if they're vulnerable or not. In order to do that, you've got to discover your network. Yep. Once you've discovered your network and you've identified your crown jewels, what is my priority next? If I've got all these vulnerabilities and a whole list of 12,000 vulnerabilities, which one should I fix today, which is going to make me most secure? Okay. Once you've identified those, it's okay, I think I fixed it. Let's do some attack simulation. Has it been fixed? Okay. Yes, it has been fixed. Great. I can now work through the rest of my workflow to say, okay, now I've known that fixes that problem. Where else have I got that problem? And let's repeat the cycle again and again. And what we're finding when we speak to customers is a lot of the tools in order to do any of those 5 processes, they've already got. So this isn't a go out and buy new technology sort of conversation. You've got breach attack simulations. You've got vulnerability assessments. You've got attack management and software. So you've got the tools already. This framework is just joining the dots between some or all of the tools you've already got. To give you the phrase I hear a lot when speaking to customers who've gone through this is a common language. Traditionally, we have the security team, we have the network team, we have the DevOps teams, we have the board, and they all speak their own language. And what CTEM can do is actually create a common language all 4 or 5 of those organizations understand. So when you're having meetings and when you're describing what is our risk to the board, you're not just saying our risk is these 12,000 vulnerabilities, is we've identified these 12 major issues and we've spent the last week fixing them. Therefore, the board are more confident in what you're doing as a CISO, as a security team. That builds trust with the board as well, which means your budget stays the same or increases even because they can actually see what value you bring to their business risk. That's part of the whole structure here, is joining the dots between different departments so you've got that common language.
And I think that's really poignant because as we've seen the issues in the UK around retail, that's really pricked the ears up of the board. And so we're now getting, as security professionals, we're getting called in to explain our working and go through the maths so that not only the risks are highlighted, but actually what are we doing about them? How is that measurable? And I think this sort of disciplined process can be really useful to hold yourself accountable or hold yourself to account for your own situation you've created as a security leader, because that can be really difficult to do. It also gives you something a handrail for your team to follow. If you're thinking about a new security control or a new risk has emerged, right, well, let's go through scoping, discovery, prioritization, validation, and let's do something about it. And I think that's really important.
Get that technology brought into your organization through the broad process, that they can see why it's going to help their risk profile, rather than you're just buying a new, trendy, sexy security tool because you like what it does. So it's just linking all those groups back together again.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, discovery and prioritization really stand out amongst that list of 5. Discovering, I mean, you mentioned network, right? But actually, we know that people's estate is far more complicated than a traditional network. It's got identities on it. It's got SaaS on it. It's got elements in the cloud. And so actually doing that really diligently is really tricky, but it's got to be in there, because if you've got blind spots in any areas, those are your vulnerabilities. And if they get found out by an actor, they're going to go for the easiest path, which will be exactly that.
Yeah, and you have to question yourself as to why are there blind spots in my environment from a security perspective? I don't want this conversation to turn into a skill shortage conversation. That's part of the problem. We are short of skilled security engineers. If they're spending all their time discovering and patching vulnerabilities, which aren't real vulnerabilities per se, as in things that attackers are going to use to get into your environment, to get to your crown jewels, you're not being the most effective as you can or as efficient as you can be. So part of that prioritization helps your SOC teams and the security engineers actually do the most valuable bit of work each and every day.
I think we're straying into our next discussion topic, right? Which is why this is important now. From my perspective, I think that the attack surfaces that businesses, even down to 200-300 seats, are presenting online are significant. And if you think people are now trying to make use of, the benefits that can come from cloud or hybrid infrastructure, remote workers, shadow IT is going to be all over the place because you're less connected with the wider business. The SaaS sprawl that's going to be generated as a result is colossal. These could create real vulnerabilities if you're not on top of that phase 2, that discovery. And I think going back to a point we made earlier, people still relying on static controls where they've got annual pen tests, yearly reviews, maybe with a consultant. If these don't match real-time threat dynamics, then going back to my OODA loop mentioned earlier, then you're going to be outpaced by the adversary and you're not going to be ahead of them with your defenses.
Exactly. You mentioned misconceptions, I guess, there at the start of that sentence. There are lots of misconceptions around CTEM. I guess the biggest one is we already do it because we're running our monthly scans. As you say, Tom, they're very static and things change on a daily basis in our networks. Speak to your network engineers, speak to your security engineers. They are continuously making changes, and therefore your security posture can continuously change with those changes. So CTEM is continuous, it's contextual. It's not just about producing a great big list of known vulnerabilities and saying, this is what we've got to fix to be secure. Another one I've heard from customers, that's just another way of doing more pen testing. Now, pen testing is part of the CTEM process, but it's not the only part of the process. Red teaming, the breach attack simulation, the verification that you've fixed the problem is all part of it. But if you're just doing pen testing or just doing those monthly scans, you're not really understanding what CTEM is really about. And then the one what comes up the most is we're not big enough to take on this process. I spend my days talking to customers of different sizes and recommending different tool sets for different sizes of organizations and different vendors and different products. But actually, because CTEM is a process, it's not about size, it's about maturity. Any company of any size can follow, as we mentioned, the 5 phases to meet their own company size. And you're still using the CTEM process and framework. So it's not about size at all. I guess the question after that we always get asked is, okay, how do I do this? Where do I start?
That's the most tricky thing, is at least at this point, someone's recognized, right, I probably need to start doing this. And I think that's really important. For in terms of getting something off the ground, I think you've obviously got the 5 series of the activities that make up this disciplined cycle. And I think to really understand your current posture, looking at your people, process, and technology to understand, are you being reactive? Where are you proactive? Where could you be proactive? And when we mean proactive, we really mean creating some sort of cycle that is continuously spinning to increase your security. At grassroots level, that is the first thing I would say people could really start with, is that where can we introduce cyclical processes to continuously evaluate what we're doing and what's in place?
And CTEM shouldn't be seen as a project with a start and an end date. You can have a start and end date to implement this process, but it is a continuous program. It will change with you. You'll find as your network changes, as your security risk changes, as the industry and as the world changes, you may drop in or drop out certain parts of each of those processes, but it is continuous. The thing to remember, we mentioned it earlier, is that you may not even need to buy any new kit or any new services or technology to follow the CTEM process. You might already have a lot of the tools needed to give you the information on what you're doing is joining the dots.
And I think the key element for getting something off the ground is, just as you mentioned, what are my high risk areas? And am I putting my effort towards applying cyclical processes to securing them to understand their exposure? Because that's where your highest risk is. So that's what the board wants to see you doing. Even if you're saying, look, I don't have the team to roll this out across my entire estate. However, I have gone after my highest risk and I've put a process in place to monitor that. And the plan is now to expand that. That's where I see someone could really make an impact.
It's a very important point there, Tom, you made, is don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and do this in one go. Pick a division, a department, an area, whatever, and do a pilot. You've got to get multiple teams on board on this. It's got to be the board. It's got to be your DevOps. It's got to be your network guys. It's got to be security team. Yes, they've all got to learn to trust each other and trust the process. After the first sort of pilot and trial of this, that actually it makes life easier for everybody. So they would get to trust the process, and then you can expand out from there.
We're coming towards the end now. Rob, if someone listening had a takeaway that you wanted to give them about the discussion that we've had or about CTEM, what's that critical takeaway that you've got?
It's a process, not a tool. So over the next couple of months, probably years, everybody we can start getting marketing from various vendors and various suppliers out there saying, we have a CTEM tool, buy this product and it does use CTEM. Remember what we've been saying for the last 10 minutes. No, it's not a single tool. It's not even a single technology. It is a process. It's a framework to follow. You don't have to get all of those tools from one vendor. You may have different vendors already in your security stack, but joining those dots together and putting some common language between the departments means CTEM works.
We're really poignant. Yeah, great. I think from my perspective, if I was going to boil this down for one key takeaway that stood out for me, obviously I completely agree with what you've said there about it being a process. I think that's really important. I think secondly, because I'm going second, so I have to take the second best key takeaway. It's that it doesn't have to be difficult to implement. You can create a trial. You can put this on a high risk area and trial it in isolation in one aspect of your estate to prove that it can work. And I think that getting started with some of these things, which seem like mammoth tasks, is always going to be the tricky bit. So get started on a small area, build your techniques, procedures, build the program up, and then expand. Rob, it's been great talking about this. I think it'll be really interesting for people to listen through and hopefully they'll all take something away. If anybody out there is interested in continuing to build their understanding about CTEM, things that we've used in our research is the NCSC's a new direction towards continuous assessment and version 4.0 of CAF, but also CrowdStrike's Threat Hunting Report 2025, which for me really highlighted the escalation in sophisticated attacks, especially within the UK. So Rob, thank you very much for joining me. It's been great to chat this through with you, and look out for any further Red Helix podcasts coming in the future.
Thank you very much.